3 years in running, and the coronavirus crazy still continues. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Where do you stand on the government's response to the coronavirus? Regular listeners of Bold and Blunt know where I stand on this issue, and readers of my book, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom, know where I stand on this issue. But I'm curious, where do you stand? When you see somebody walking down the street by themselves in the open air, nobody around, wearing a face mask, what goes through your head? That poor soul, so misguided, so frightened, so uninformed. Somebody to be pitied. There are too many to be pitied out there still. There are too many people who drank the COVID Kool-Aid. Not saying that the virus wasn't real, not saying that the virus isn't real, not saying that some people did in fact die from the virus, and certainly with the virus, certainly the virus in many deaths exasperated the medical health conditions that those people were suffering, bringing about an untimely, sooner than expected death. So not denying any of that, not denying the coronavirus is real. But I am saying what I said way back when Donald Trump was even president in April of 2020, as a matter of fact. I am saying that the coronavirus will go down in history as the biggest political hoax of all time. That is a paraphrase of a headline of an opinion piece I wrote at the Washington Times in April 2020. You can still check it out to this day. And I am saying that, guess what? That came true. But before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcast, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter. Find my name hyperlinked, click on it, scroll to the part on the webpage where it says Bold and Blunt. Sign up for my newsletter there. You'll get all the talking points from all the columns I write all day, all week long at the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts. And of course, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever fine podcasts are offered. The left, the far left, the Democrats, their partners in Big Pharma and the global governments have used the coronavirus, or more to truth, used fears about the coronavirus to bring about this change in government structure, where those in government get to tell those who pay government salaries exactly what to do, what not to do, when to do it, and when not to do it. The fact that in America, a nation that was founded on the idea of rights coming from God and government only being put in place to protect those inherent God-given rights, the fact that in a nation like this, people complied so quickly with these lockdown measures was astonishing to me. It was shocking. The most shocking part was when the churches folded. The churches, you know, the ones who represent the founding ideals of this nation, God-given rights, the ones that represent the entire reason that this nation was founded in the first place, the quest for religious freedom, the ones that represent the flow from which all other individual rights come from. The churches folded, caved, shut down, complied with government orders, and depending on what part of the nation you lived in, stopped those who did manage to squeak past the COVID security at the doors, did stop them from singing in church. Governor Gavin Newsom, California, remember that? So where do you stand on the coronavirus today? Have you resumed life as normal? Are you laughing at those who are still going about pretending as if face masks will protect them from a virus? Are you angry at the government for forcing certain segments of American society, the military, public sector workers, to get vaccines? Are you outraged that those who did get the vaccines, which are really shots in my mind, not vaccines, that those who did get the shots were treated as guinea pigs for Anthony Fauci and his big pharma designs? You should be. And you should be asking questions. You should be asking the right kind of questions that lead to conclusions of this. Never again. In America, nothing, not a fear of a virus, not a fear of a terrorist attack, not a fear of China invasion, not a fear of anything should ever take over and push to the side the concept of freedom. It's freedom first. Freedom in God-given rights first. Everything else second. And if Americans hadn't ceded so many freedoms in recent years, perhaps America wouldn't have been so locked down so quickly without so much of barely a fight. And the fact that we still haven't moved on completely from this pandemic is just as astonishing to me as the fact that churches folded in the face of government dictates and orders 3 years ago. Look, the pandemic is certainly past. There's no data out there that show this pandemic is still at a pandemic proportion. There's also no evidence out there that show face masks, as worn by normal citizens as they go about their normal day-to-day business, actually work. And by work, it's meant, as the government messaged that word to mean, that it would slow or stop the transmission and spread of the virus. They don't. They don't because people don't wear face masks 100% of the time, never touching them, never pulling them down to eat or to breathe or to take a little break from the face mask on their face. People don't live in that laboratory world in which these face masks are so often tested. It was ridiculous from the beginning. Common sense will tell you that you can't get an entire nation of millions of people to wear face masks without removing them for even a second. Because once you do that, then their breath is released into the air. Then the air in their surrounding areas becomes contaminated. You have to wear the face mask in a lab setting, in a clinical setting, such as surgeons do when they perform surgical procedures. And the shots that we were told, if you get the shot, then the spread of COVID will come to a halt. If you get the shot, then people won't die from COVID. Well, guess what? The shots didn't work as promised either. They went from 95% efficacy to 20% efficacy. And then not even that, because then here come the booster after booster after booster. You need to get boosters for the rest of your life from what the government now wants from infancy all the way up through senior citizen status. What is that, like 70 shots in a lifetime, 1 per year? That's crazy. But this is where we're at in America. And guess what? It's not over yet. The nightmare has not come to an end. It should have. It should have back when Donald Trump was president. It should have been apparent to everybody in America that the government wasn't putting out information so much as a means of protecting American citizens as it was putting out information as a means of hyping the hysteria and fear so as to justify seizing individual liberties from Americans. Nobody says that better than, hey, Woody Harrelson, a recent Saturday Night Live skit. If you haven't heard it, here it is.
And start reading. Okay, so the movie goes like this. The biggest drug cartels in the world get together and buy up all the media and all the politicians and force all the people in the world to stay locked in their homes And people can only come out if they take the cartel's drugs and keep taking them over and over. I threw the script away. I mean, who is going to believe that crazy idea, being forced to do drugs? I do that voluntarily all day long. Anyway, it's about that time.
Anyway, it's about that time. It's about that time for America to completely move past the coronavirus and move on to the phase of accountability for all the lying liars out there who told us lie after lie after lie after lie. It's time to hold people accountable for the coronavirus deceptions, for the losses in liberties, for the losses of businesses, for the losses of human dignities based on fears that were hyped, generated, and pushed in large part by the very elected and non-elected but tax-paid personnel who are supposed to protect us. And I have a guest today, Steve Deace. You know him from The Blaze. You know him from a variety of media outlets. You know him from the many best-selling books he has written in the past. And he has a new book out right now, co-authored with Daniel Horowitz, Rise of the Fourth Reich, Confronting COVID Fascism with a New Nuremberg Trial, so this never happens again. So his new book is all about calling for accountability for the coronavirus lies and deceptions. Steve, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
It's always a pleasure, Cheryl. Thank you very much.
Congratulations on your new book, co-authored, called Rise of the Fourth Reich, Confronting COVID Fascism with a New Nuremberg Trial. So this never happens again. Love the title. What is COVID fascism?
COVID fascism is something that really dates back to what we saw at the advent of the 20th century. Eugenics, what we now call technocratic utopianism, expert classism, the idea of an elite level of experts or bureaucrats that can find ways to perfect the human species and human society, with them, of course, determining, as always, Cheryl, the definition of perfection. And this was manifested in the early 20th century with eugenics and Margaret Sanger, who went on to found Planned Parenthood. Several of the speakers at her conferences in the early 20th century would go on and work in the Third Reich. In the Third Reich, it became known as biomedical fascism or biomedical nationalism, would have been how they would have referred to it. If you go back to the Nuremberg trials after World War II, they held separate trials for the medical system because they were the tip of the spear in imposing a lot of the Nazi policies. The medical class was one of the first to line up and sign up with the Third Reich. The idea of perfection, Aryanism, those things, again, fit into the new 20th century technocratic age. And really, we sort of kept this institutionalized front of Malthusian ethics. We kind of kept it at bay from World War II on. It popped up every now and then, but you had things like the Nuremberg Code and other free societies that had checks and balances to keep it pushed down. But now, with the advent of COVID, you saw the Thanos snap, and from March 16th, 2020 on, worldwide, we saw something that had never occurred. Well, I would argue, as a Christian, not since Babel, but if you're a historian, maybe in all of human history. You saw every nation essentially erase its borders, essentially beat all of its swords into plowshares, and immediately begin to impose the end of the indefinite end and suspension of human flourishing, prosperity, basically the things we take for granted living in Western civilization, but almost throughout the entire globe. Nothing like this had happened before without a shot fired or a treaty signed in all of human history. And so that's why we refer to it as the Fourth Reich. At least with the Third Reich, when an individual nation decides that it's going to be the entity that imposes its will on others, other nations that may also be rotten and wretched will still rise up to oppose it out of nationalistic rivalry, Cheryl, if nothing else. Hey, we want to be the ones. We want to be the Lord of the Manor, not you, right? We want to be Old Major on the Animal Farm, not you. In this case, all of the pigs said, you're right. We'll just all do this together. We will all end our ways of life with no promise of when they will return. We will do them all together for junk science, experimentation, which goes well into the jabs and everything else. Nothing like this, Cheryl, had ever happened before, and that's why we refer to it as COVID fascism. It was the private sector that was utilized to impose a lot of this tyranny on us, alongside working with the government. That's the classic definition of fascism, elites in the public and private sector conspiring together to control the greater population. And then we refer to it as the Fourth Reich because we saw a lot of the same biomedical policies that came out of the Third Reich. We saw them imposed here in this era, but this time across the globe.
It really was very astonishing to me as well how quickly Americans were to cede their individual liberties. And I want to go back to what you referenced a minute ago about the Christian aspect of this, because I think that hits the nail on the head. That's basically the root of how this took off so quickly. Do you think that because America has turned a corner towards secularism and lost much of its religious roots, that this was the perfect time for the COVID tyrants to bring about their tyranny?
Absolutely. You know, if we're going to get biblical, then let's preach a little, Cheryl.
Let's do it.
Says when the time was right, God sent His Son. Now, what does that mean? When the time was right, did they spin the wheel of destiny in heaven and it came up? It's Messiah Day. Send Jesus. No. In the first century, we had for the first time since Babel, much of human civilization was united by one singular set of customs, a couple of different languages and political legal systems: Latin, the Greco-Roman culture, Latin and Greek as a language. This was, and the Romans had created sort of proto-primitive forms of mass transit, early forms of paving walks and shipping lanes in the open seas and things of that nature. So this was really the first time since the fall that you could, or since the flood, that you could get masses or a message to the masses around a centralized system. There wasn't a moment in human history before that. And so the first immediate moment that it was possible for Messiah to come, select apostles, and that message to get out to the larger world, aside from the political and religious system, God acted. So did the enemy, Cheryl. After a generation of dumbing people down, and I don't mean in terms of knowledge, I mean something even more basic than that. No critical thinking at all.
Yes.
None. Okay? No critical thinking at all. The idea of being just uber compliant. Anything you tell me to do, I will do. Anything you tell me to impose upon my own children, I will do that as well. And then the minute they had that, they also post-Obamacare irrevocably wrecked our medical system. You're not a patient anymore with a provider. You're a case file now, and now you're just you're just guidelines that we get from CDC and FDA on how to treat you, what to treat you with, and you fit into those guidelines. You're a community rating. You're a neighborhood rating. Men cover pap smears now because no one's a person now. I mean, it's like Bob Seger's prophecy. You feel like a number. Okay, so they had altered the culture of the medical system. They had through the education system dumbed down a generation of Americans who couldn't possibly think for themselves and view being asked to almost like an act of tyranny. And so the minute it was right for the global system to strike, the minute they were prepared, they waited, they bided their time. And then when this virus was leaked from that lab in Wuhan, for whatever reasons, likely malicious ones, they were ready to act and implement the fullness of what they had long been planning.
It's very demonic, really, because the basis for locking everybody down, for regulating all human activity, was fear. And of course, biblically speaking, the opposite of fear is faith. And as Americans lose faith, fear enters the picture.
Mm-hmm. Right on the money. I mean, you can't leave your home, right? So, well, listen, if you're in East Palestine, Ohio, totes cool to leave your home with a mushroom cloud pluming of chemicals in the air,
right,
and JD Vance showing you the fish are literally on fire. Totally okay to leave your home and drink that water. If it's the spring of 2020, however, and the sun is shining bright and the weather is warm, the perfect opportunity to get out, get some vitamin D, and purge a respiratory virus out of your system and boost your immune system. Not safe to go out. In fact, if you do even chance it, you should probably wear a mask. everything. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the liberty killer. Fear is what is used to get you to become compliant. And that is absolutely the number one weapon that was used here. This is the first time we've ever had a plague in human history, Cheryl, that we had to convince people that it wasn't as bad as they were hoping it was, right? The people in Pompeii went on with orgies and revelry while the volcano was erupting. And you're like, dude, it's a volcano. Run. No, they didn't. That's why we've got, so many great records of what happened there. A lot of those people got fossilized in the lava, okay? This is the first time that people are like, I demand this be more serious. I demand it. Don't take my mask away from me. I am Golem. That is my precious. By all means, and you're right, I should stay in my home and make my child stay in my home until a mass experimental human trial of technology never injected into people ever before shows up to magically save me. There is no precedent for this in human history. Think of all of the worst paranoid moments, the Salem witch trials, and on and on. It's like they all converged unharmonically, but demonically, as you put it, in this moment for the last few years. And it's not over yet, by the way.
Right.
It won't be over until there's a reckoning. If the people that did this are not punished like we punished them at Nuremberg, they will do it again, I promise.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I was about to segue into that very same topic about whether this is actually over and there's a return to pre-pandemic normalcies and so forth. And here's my concern, Steve. It's not just the fact that you still see people ridiculously wearing face masks as they drive down the roads in their cars by themselves, and as hospitals insist on wearing face masks, even though we know by now that this is stupid science. But it's the fact that we've turned a corner from individualism to collectivism in this country. And how do we get back to God-given liberties?
There was a great moment on Saturday Night Live this weekend, and man, I haven't said that probably in about 25 or 30. All right, but there was a great moment on Saturday Night Live this weekend with Woody Harrelson.
Right, I just watched it.
Yeah. And it's funny, the crowd laughs, and he talks about he's almost 60 and he's still smoking blunts, right, and doing drugs. And he's that's our Woody, that's our young simpleton going back to the Cheers days in the 90s. That's our guy who never grew up. That's our Peter Pan. And then he looks at him and he drops some knowledge on them about what went on with Pfizer, Moderna, and the drug and the biomedical fascist state the last few years. And suddenly that crowd stops laughing and they are silent as church mice.
Right.
Okay? Because he's talking about them. We live in an era now. I said this to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about a month ago. I met him. We were doing an event together in Nashville. And I said, I got to tell you, brother, I got into this business to beat liberals like you. And now I'm going to do something I almost never do. Ask if I can get a picture with you. Okay? Because what the last few years showed is we are in an epistemological crisis in the West. I still have irreconcilable moral and theological differences with people like Bill Maher, Russell Brand, and Woody Harrelson.
Right.
But when it comes to the basics of common sense and the search for truth, I have more epistemologically in common with them than I do high-profile leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention. I have more in common with them than I do the Gospel Coalition.
Yep.
What the last few years really showed you is who will take a mark and then demand you do the same. Who will do that? Who would really push back against that? And it may not necessarily always be who you think. That was one of the challenges in the first century with the Messiah. Nothing good comes from Nazareth. He's not one of the special teachers. It would come from among us. We would know, right? That's kind of how God works. Truth comes from people like Woody Harrelson sometimes. And so I think that what we're witnessing here, and I hate to say this, I love this country. I'm gonna wear America. What are you gonna do about it, kid from the 80s? This is not easy for me to say by any stretch. We're dying as a civilization. You're watching this happen in real time. You're watching a Romans 1 style of judgment against a self-imposed Romans 1 style of judgment. That's what Romans 1 judgment is. You were so intent on your own rebellion that God gave you finally what you said you wanted, and now you choke on it. That's what's happening to us. And if we don't see great awakening revivals like we saw that gave birth to liberty on this continent, then we will watch liberty die on this continent as well.
And, you know, that's exactly what's happening. It's very dismal and people don't like hearing that. But look, you got to face the truth. America is indeed dying. And we're doing it as the toad in the boiling water. Most people aren't even realizing it. And that's the real peril here. I like the second part of your title, a new Nuremberg trial is needed so this never happens again, because I truly agree that without accountability, we're just going to continue down this path of regulatory clampdowns on individual freedoms. But do you see that really happening? Do you see accountability?
I think actually the greatest challenge to that, for one, isn't really the political class. I mean, I don't think that they're anxious for it, okay? But you've got pockets of it. I mean, in Florida, for example, DeSantis has convened a grand jury. You know, his own health department is under Joe Latipo, one of the first frontline doctors, original frontline doctors. Has funded the drug cartels. France, just about an hour or two before you and I started our conversation today, announced that it's no longer going to recommend the jabs any longer for the larger population. There's pockets of this. I actually think for the first time, the problem is really the people. Cheryl, less than 15% of American adults didn't take any of that gene juice. I think there's a lot of people, and they know what's going on. I mean, you can just look at the numbers. You can see with every round of proposed boosters, the numbers of people on the intake has dropped precipitously to it's almost nothing now on this fifth round of boosters. Almost nobody's getting it, okay? So they know. The people know. But for a reckoning to happen, I think there's a lot of people that are like, you know what, man, I don't want to confront the fact I might be the next guy suddenly or collapse, suddenly time bomb. I might be the next woman who can't get pregnant. I might be the next husband that can't get his wife pregnant. I don't want to confront the fact, you know, that I might have given. I told my kid to go ahead and take this jab so you can play high school football, and now he might end up with myocarditis that takes and shaves 5 to 10 years off his life on the back end. I don't want to be one of those 7% of people in the CDC's V-Safe program that say they've had a serious or major adverse event to this vaccine up until death. And so let's just make it go away, right? Let's just make it go away. It was crazy. It was nuts. We're not doing it again. We all aren't taking them. We know what's going on. But to have this is separate. You know, most Germans did not actively participate in the atrocities of the Third Reich. Now, they permissively did.
Right.
They didn't rise up to stop it, right? But they weren't typically, the average German wasn't jumping off his bicycle and grabbing a Jew and running him into the Third Reich headquarters. They were just living their lives. They weren't doing anything to stop it, but they were just living their lives. Here, the corruption infiltrated every single household in the country, just about. And I think there's a lot of people that are like, all right, 93% odds then that I'm okay. Let's just move on. And I don't want to deal with the stress and the anxiety of the possibility that I might not be. And if I'm the next one to get Bell's palsy, if I'm the next one that can't hear out of an ear, if I'm the next one who lost all my sperm motility, I'll confront it when it happens. But until then, I just want to move on and forget all of this ever happened. The problem is, and I get that, but if we do that, it greatly raises the odds that it will happen again.
Exactly. Without accountability, without acknowledging the guilt of the sins of government and American citizens who complied with government ridiculous overreach, we can never conquer and move forward. I really do appreciate you taking a few minutes to come on Bold and Blunt. I look forward to reading your book, Rise of the Fourth Reich, Confronting COVID Fascism with a New Nuremberg Trial, so this never happens again. Steve, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt.
You bet, Joe. I really appreciate it. God bless you.
God bless. Steve Deace, some common sense discussion about the COVID crazy. Look, I don't know where you stand on how the government reacted to the coronavirus, but at this point in time, if your community, if your government, if your state, locality, or anybody in your area of governmental influence is trying to push mask mandates and social distancing and school closures at this point in time, even you have to sit up and question why, what's going on. If you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts at washingtontimes.com, or wherever fine podcasts are offered. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.